It's my nerd world. Welcome to it. A Star Wars podcast. This week on the show, one's ignorance does not a bad sequel trilogy make. Yes, we're going to talk about people complaining about the sequel trilogy again, but it's kind of a slow news week, and I got an interesting email, and I promise that I will make it compelling and rich. We do have a few news items to talk about, though. We got some Mandalorian Season 2 information out there, some Obi-Wan Kenobi live-action show stuff to talk about. Also, a new Star Wars book answers some questions about Snoke. I can kind of dig it. I kind of like it. And we do have listener feedback, as I mentioned, so let us not waste another moment and get to this week's Star Wars show.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
You know what doesn't get talked about enough? I'm not even joking. You know what doesn't get talked about enough? How awesome Star Wars is, right? We're going to get into people griping again this week, and it's a listener feedback question, and I did a deep dive into an answer. All right, we're going to get into that, but we just don't talk enough about just how rad and how rich and how entertaining and how awesome Star Wars is. It is so inspirational. It has changed so many lives, and it is just so much fun. I mentioned this on a previous show. It might have been on the Space Opera podcast that I'm doing, and that is, you know, when it comes to Star Wars, I mean, even like your worst Doing Nothing with My Fingers Star Wars movie is still, you know, kind of better than like your best Doing Nothing with My Fingers space opera movie. It just, Star Wars is awesome. I watched Solo, a Star Wars story, yesterday, and it was really interesting because, well, okay, maybe this isn't that interesting. In my mind, it's interesting. I had intended on watching Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker this weekend. I even went to my wife and I said, hey, you know, I won't take away any of your and our movie watching time for the weekend, but I am really in a Star Wars mood this weekend, and don't roll your eyes too hard at me when I watch Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. For some reason yesterday, after work and dealing, we have a new puppy. We were going to call the new puppy Sabine, but then Melinda came back with Artemis, and Artemis stuck. A character I also love, Goddess of the Hunt, but from Ready Player One. Be that as it may. I was dealing with puppy stuff because it's like having a small child around the house. And so I decided to get started on a Star Wars movie when I finally had some time earlier in the day, and then I figured I'd finish it before I went off to bed. And for some reason, I decided to put on Solo, even though I had intended to watch The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi is actually still sitting in the Blu-ray player, and I watched Solo on the Disney streaming app. And again, I've seen that movie, you know, 24, 24 times now, easily. Don't watch it as frequently as I do the saga films, but again, one of those experiences, sitting down and watching a Star Wars movie that I'd seen a bunch and just having a great time. And in the middle of watching it, I'm just like, this is great. This is so much fun. Star Wars is so rich and so entertaining. And I can't believe that we even waste any time talking about the negativity of it, right? And I've gone into it on the show, the amount of money that's made off the negativity and the clicks that people get, and the YouTube channels where they're pulling in dough just because they're just complaining about everything. I get all that, but we don't talk enough about just how much fun and how great Star Wars is as a whole. It really, really is. And as I was heading to do the show today, I got my notes put together, And I always make a custom graphic for the YouTube version, right? You probably listen to this. Most people listen to the show via whatever podcast, outlet app you use. But there are a handful of people that listen to it from YouTube. And I always make a custom video on YouTube, and I'll grab a picture and put some graphics on it and title of the show and whatnot. So I knew I was going to be talking about the sequel trilogy a bit today based off a listener feedback email. So I grabbed a sequel trilogy picture, and it was actually the artwork that was done and on display at the last celebration that took place. That was the one in, was it the one in Denver? Is that one? Anyway, it was really, really cool and unique art. But as I did the image search, one graphic came up talking about throwing it away, it's abysmal, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, what is this? Out of curiosity, so I clicked it. And it took me to that Victor Doom Blank guy that started the rumor that Disney and Lucasfilm were going to be scrapping all of the sequel trilogy. And this came out back in July, and I actually talked about it on one of the shows. Now, I had not done a deep dive into it. I saw who put the information out and instantly and correctly dismissed it, because that dude's about as big of a liar as Mike Zero is. But I was just sitting down, watching my NASCAR race, and getting ready to come down here and do the show. I'm like, all right, fine, I'll bite. I'll go look at this. There was an article attached to it, and it was a Disney website, Disney-focused website that ran an article based off this Doom Blank guy's podcast or show. So I read the article, and I just was shaking my head. I can't believe how many different shows that I tuned into that covered that garbage reporting that was clearly just a bunch of lies, to the point where I actually went to that Doom guy's YouTube page, just out of pure curiosity, because I'm like, well, is this guy still doing stuff? Because I haven't heard anybody talk about him at all. And I go to his page, and I hit the video link, and it's nothing but negative rumors and speculation about Star Trek and Star Wars and all these. I mean, the guy's he's just making money off of hating on science fiction franchises and getting clicks from the fan base that apparently enjoys hearing people slam these fantastic pieces of creative content. I just can't relate to that in the least bit. So, all right, let's get into the show this week. We do have a couple of news items that we need to get to, some fun stuff to talk about. So let us not waste any more time.
Spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
So this is not huge, earth-shattering news that requires a bunch of time to go down the speculation rabbit hole. It's just basically information. So The Mandalorian Season 2 is going to air weekly on Fridays like it did. And there will be no double-up releases or any hiatus. So starting on October 30th, and I'm actually looking at my calendar right now, and then for the following 8 weeks into December, leading up to, I think it's the 18th, if I'm not mistaken, of December, we will get a Mandalorian episode every single Friday for 8 weeks straight. So, cool. I don't really have anything else to add for that. I do like the fact that The Mandalorian is released on a weekly basis. I will probably continue doing what I did last season, because I get up, my alarm goes off at 2:30 in the morning, and if I budget my time and I leave enough time before I have to go to work, I can usually, in the darkness of early morning, go up and watch the latest episode before I head into work, because I'm that big of a Star Wars fan, in case you didn't know. That might change, because, like I said, we have a new puppy who is sleeping in her crate at night, and that may end up putting a monkey wrench into my plans, because I do not want to watch the first episode for the first time on a small screen. So I may have to rethink that. But I do like the fact the Mandalorian comes out on a weekly basis. It does give us time to digest it every week, for podcasts to go out, to listen to the speculation. And I am assuming, based off of what we've heard so far, that Season 2 is going to get a lot richer when it comes to storytelling, even though I love Season 1. We're going to get deeper into the characters, deeper into some mythology, and I am here for it 100%. Ewan McGregor, moving on to some other news, has officially stated, I was doing an interview recently, that Obi-Wan and the live-action show will begin filming in March of next year. So I don't know what that means in terms of release. If they're planning on getting it out later in 2021, if we're looking at 2022, but it will begin filming in the first part of next year in March, so that's good news. And I want to take a moment and direct you over to mynerdworld.net. This is not for book pimping. I'll do that later in the show. No, at mynerdworld.net, I have a My Nerd blog there that I've been trying to be as active on as possible. And I devoted several days this week to the movie industry and the future of the movie industry and the unexpected consequences of society without films. For example, we've been going to the movies en masse and to see color films, right? We were obviously going to see movies before this, but when we started watching colorized movies, that was back in the 1930s. We've been going to the movies before then, and certainly, again, en masse ever since then. This is the longest period of time in American history, even global history, where we have gone this long without having major motion pictures released in the theaters. And it goes beyond that. We can't, as a society, go out and experience the things that remind us that even though we may disagree about religion and politics, there are things that we do agree on and can come together over. That's sporting events, and that's movies, and that's concerts, and that's conventions. They're the great equalizers in society, and I'm not going to get political. I do a little bit on the blog, just so you're aware, but we right now as a society look more divided than we ever have been because we're not allowed to even go, depending on where you live, but for the most part, you're not allowed to even go out in public and see somebody's faces inside of a store. And so we're not allowed to experience those things that unite us apart from the things that divide us outside of that. And that is detrimental to society in ways that I don't even think most people have even realized or that we're even going to know until we get further down the line. And it raises a really big question in my mind of when do we actually begin returning to the movies and the movie theaters again in large groups the way that we used to. I'm incredibly worried about that. The movie-going experience at home is not the same as going and seeing a movie in a theater with a bunch of other people that you've never met before, but you're all there because you love Star Wars. And I'm worried about that. So if you go to mynerdworld.net and you go to my Nerd blog, you can see, again, 3 or 4 posts, and pretty lengthy too. I didn't realize how much I'd actually wrote. I should put them into a book there on the website. I would encourage you to go check it out. And also, if you haven't joined the newsletter yet, please do. I am building my newsletter. It is not for spam purposes. It is just for promotion of my EMBARK science fiction space opera series and the podcast that you're listening to right now. I am putting together something very special just for individuals who are signed up for the newsletter. So you definitely want to go and do that at mynerdworld.net, and the link is available right smack dab on the homepage under the details link for my science fiction space opera series. So go to mynerdworld.net, check out the blog, and get yourself signed up for the newsletter. All right, let's move on.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
I love Snoke. I don't think I've talked about this on the show. I think Snoke was awesome. he's no Palpatine. And the fact that we get Palpatine back in The Rise of Skywalker, and as much as Palpatine as we get, and the sequel trilogy version of Palpatine, because he is a little bit different, in my opinion. The version of Palpatine that we get in The Rise of Skywalker is kind of a combination of the Palpatine that we get at the end of Revenge of the Sith and the one that we get at the end of Return of the Jedi, and he seems even more evil, and I really dig that. But I really like Snoke, and I like the fact, and maybe I would feel differently if the story around Snoke was different and we continued on with his character. But for as much as I like Snoke, I'm actually totally fine that he ended up getting killed in The Last Jedi, just because of how meaningful that moment was for Kylo Ren and a soon-to-be redeemed back to Ben Solo. But to me, a big reason why I love The Last Jedi so much is because of Snoke and what Rian Johnson did with that character. There's a brand new book that's coming out here in just a few days on October 20th that is just called the Star Wars book. And they just have a lot of details about different aspects of Star Wars. It's really as simple as that. It does answer some questions about Supreme Leader Snoke, and I dig this, so I wanted to share this with you if you haven't seen it yet. So we have a holocron file where we get Snoke's name. His species is listed as artificial in parentheses, a genetic strand cast. Dig that word, strand cast. Homeworld Exegol. Affiliation, Sith proxy, First Order. Abilities, Force Perception, Telekinesis, Force Lightning, Aim, Galactic Conquest. Status report, he was slain by Kylo Ren. So this is what the write-up says about Snoke, right? For much of its history, the First Order lurks in the shadowy edges of the unknown regions. Its leader is a towering humanoid with a broken build, a scarred being known only as Snoke. Through a Force user of impressive power, he denies any Sith lineage. Though a Force user of impressive power, he denies any Sith lineage. In fact, only scant details exist regarding his origins. It's possible Snoke himself may not know his true nature. Snoke is a strandcast, an artificial genetic construct concocted by the resurrected Darth Sidious to be his proxy in power. Snoke has free will, but his actions and goals are still orchestrated by Sidious. Snoke senses the coming of Rey as an awakening in the Force. He is disappointed by the First Order leader Kylo Ren's inability to stop her. He goads Ren all to push the darkness in him. Snoke, who is ordinarily extremely cognizant of Ren's thoughts and motives, doesn't foresee that Ren will outmaneuver him. Through Snoke, I screwed up both those words. Through Snoke, Sidious sidesteps the tradition of a dark side apprentice, slaying his master to ascend, which happens when Kylo Ren betrays Snoke and slices him in two. Ren then assumes the mantle of Supreme Leader of the First Order. Ren's examination of Snoke's past turns up more mysteries and dead ends. Ren fully expects the dark voice that he has heard in his head for years to disappear once Snoke dies. But it persists. This points to someone manipulating Snoke, and Ren's search for answers uncovers the presence of the Emperor, who was believed deceased on Exegol. There, in a laboratory deep in a Sith sanctuary, are other Snoke bodies resting in nutrient fluid. It's my favorite. My favorite fluid is nutrient fluid. So, I found that really interesting. And listen, I know there are going to be people, and there were, because I read them, people that talked about how, why are we getting ancillary information of stuff that we should have known in the movies? I'm so tired of these arguments. Because they're so selective to the trilogy that you like or don't like. We didn't have any background on Palpatine when the original I've been down this road before, and I'm just going to take a few steps there, and I'm going to turn around. But we didn't have that background when it came to the original trilogy. We didn't know who the dude was on the holograph that Vader was talking to on a Star Destroyer in the middle of The Empire Strikes Back. And when he showed up in Return of the Jedi, we all thought that Vader was the big bad, and nope, it was that guy Palpatine, and we didn't know what the Sam heck was going on apart from a few throwaway lines. It wasn't until later in ancillary material that we found out a bit more background, and then certainly within the prequel trilogy. So people that want to go and look at this as retconning or bad storytelling from the sequel trilogy, I'm sorry, I just do not subscribe to that kind of belief. Again, one's ignorance does not a bad sequel trilogy make, right? I like the further explanation in the ancillary materials. That little bit that I read to you there enhances my viewing experience. And I didn't necessarily need it, but now that I got it, I'm like, cool. Think about the sequel trilogy. And this is going to kind of dovetail into we get into listener feedback here in just a moment. But think about if we'd gotten the sequel trilogy and we didn't have the internet. It'd be a completely different ballgame. Right? If we didn't have all the background and all the behind the scenes and all of the minutia of detail and the leaks of what was supposed to be in there, I really do think that there would have been a much different acceptance and reaction to the sequel trilogy than we got. I know for me, man, I love it. I love the sequel trilogy. I really do. I love what they did with it. I think it was really interesting and unique, the way that they brought up this character in the first movie, The Force Awakens. Didn't know what's going on with him. And then we get him in his full visage in The Last Jedi, only have him slain by Kylo Ren in this shocking moment that I wasn't even expecting the first time that I went to go see The Last Jedi. And then we get to the Rise of Skywalker, and it turns out that the guy that's been there all along has been the one pulling the strings. And regardless, and this is me pushing aside everything that I know about the making of these films, okay? I think it's really cool that we went into the sequel trilogy with a resetting a bit of the franchise, right? With how, I shouldn't say how, with the ways in which The Force Awakens was somewhat derivative of the original trilogy. Fine, whatever. But we didn't have an empire. We had this new First Order. I'll never forget going to that convention in 2015 in Anaheim and walking into the Force Awakens display room where they had all of the models and the outfits and they had the plaques next to everything. And that's when I first found out about the First Order. I'm like, wow, what in the world's the First Order? It's not the Empire. What's the First Order? This is cool. And we're given this new large galactic presence called the First Order that somehow has risen to prominence and power over the decades that came after Return of the Jedi. And they look kind of like the Empire. There's certainly some inspiration there, but why? What's going on? And then we find out about Snoke and all the Snoke's theories. And then we get to the Rise of Skywalker. And again, this is my opinion only. I thought it was genius what J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio did by actually explaining all of that. Because if you remember, there were people complaining about the similarities between the First Order and the Empire, and the assumption was just that, well, they modeled themselves after the Empire because that's what they aspired to. To me, it makes it even richer and better, and the mythology is thicker and more interesting when you find out that, no, they actually look that way because the guy at the helm of the Empire is the guy that's off in the shadows in his decrepit clone body looking to bring himself back into prominence somehow, and at a bare minimum, use an heir to go and take over the throne to continue on with the Sith legacy. I just think that's great. But hey, that's just me. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Drop me an email. What do you think about this new bit of information that we've gotten on Snoke? Do you dig it? Is it a disappointment? Curious to hear from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. All right, let's get into listener feedback because it's actually going to fall right in line with what I was just talking about.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, friend of the show, Brian Martin, asks this over the course of a couple of emails. In what ways does the sequel trilogy as a whole have a coherent narrative across all three movies? That's one criticism I've often heard, that it doesn't have one. The criticism that each movie in the sequel trilogy is incoherent from the story that comes before and after it. Hence why the title of this week's show, and thank you, Brian Martin, for the question, one's ignorance does not a bad sequel trilogy make. Okay. Of course, there is a cohesive narrative across all three movies. My tone and inflection, Brian, is not aimed at you. It's aimed at the individuals that are out there saying that it's not. Okay. Each character has an arc through all three movies. And I'm going to get into this. The Resistance / Rebels versus the First Order. Rey versus Kylo. Snoke versus Luke, as far as mentors are concerned. They all have to face the big bad behind it all in Palpatine by the end of the movie. For me, individuals that want to say there's no coherent narrative across these three movies, you're not looking for it. You're ignoring what it is. You don't and again, you don't have to like these movies. That's cool. You don't have to like all of them. You don't have to like one of them. It doesn't matter. We're all entitled to our own opinion, and art is subjective. My gosh, is art subjective. I'm taking these extensive self-publishing courses. There's an individual, really successful self-published author, and he has a self-publishing course, and I've been trying to learn over the course of these past 3.5, 4 years all the stuff that he teaches, and I decided to finally dive in and take the course myself, and it's really comprehensive and detailed, and it's got just a bunch of great information in it. With that, you are invited to go join a special self-publishing formula. That's what it's called. It's what it's called, SPF Facebook group. So I had created an alternate cover for EMBARK Book 1. The first cover I love. It's got my hero ship of the anniversary on the cover with a couple of T-crafts being chased by D-Corp MTCs, and I really dig it. It was my idea with the moon blowing up in the background, spoiler alert, and I decided that the stories were so character-driven that I really needed to include the characters on the cover. So I added my 5 main characters from EMBARK Book 1 on the cover, and went and loaded that up, and that's now the official cover. I didn't see much difference in sales in the adding of Ashley and Katha and Taft and Ven and Jabet. I don't know. I went and tracked it and didn't seem like it made that much difference. And so I posted both covers side by side in this SPF Facebook page and got just dozens of comments after I asked everybody, hey, which one do you like more? And guess what? It was about an even split. Half the comments liked the one without the people on it. The other half liked the one with the people on it. And my point is, art is subjective that way. All right, let's get into more of what Brian Martin had asked. Okay, again, a coherent narrative across 3 movies. Let's dive into this. A person, Rey, she awakens to the Force in The Force Awakens. The darkness grows as Snoke, and more specifically Kylo Ren, grows stronger in the Force. Kylo Ren is kind of this inverse to what we saw with Vader in his turn, right? We're seeing him more sort of on the bad side, coming back to good, as opposed, and I didn't word that correctly. You know what I'm saying. There are parallels between what Kylo Ren went through. And instead of starting right as a young child and then seeing how he went bad, here we're seeing Kylo Ren already bad who moves back to good. Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. Okay. You have Kylo Ren murdering Lor San Tekka at the beginning of The Force Awakens, and one can deduce that brings out more darkness within Kylo Ren, and as such, Rey feels this awakening in the Force. It's what Snoke talks about so often.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
As Kylo Ren struggles to turn from the light, he wants to go dark, right? In retrospect, you can see this push and pull, right? Rey is sort of struggling, to learn about this awakening inside her. In the meantime, Kylo Ren is struggling to turn to the dark and fighting this whole thing. And you actually have Rey, who's kind of struggling with it in and of herself. And this is definitely seen the push and pull of Rey and Kylo Ren, the light and the dark at the end during their duel on Starkiller Base, right? Kylo resists in that moment. Rey channels the Force and pounces and uses a bit of anger when quasi-defeating Kylo Ren. And you have these two characters, and again, that's the genius of what I thought that Chris Terrio and J.J. Abrams did with The Rise of Skywalker, is they took these seeds that they had planted without even really knowing it, and then it made them pay off. Because here you have Rey kind of teetering with some dark side stuff. In the meantime, Kylo Ren sees something in Rey and kind of backs off, but he's already injured. He's struggling in the film, talking to the helmet, show me again the power of the darkness, right? He feels the pull of the light. So these two characters are both feeling their own inner conflicts going on between them. Meanwhile, you have the First Order taking out the New Republic, setting the stage for a potential tyrannical ruling of the known galaxy. The Resistance sets the First Order back in destroying Starkiller Base, much like the Rebels did in A New Hope. Overall, Rey is trying to find out who she is and where she came from. You get into The Last Jedi, and you have Rey training. Again, feeling the push and pull of the light and the dark, as Kylo Ren is also, except now these two are being drawn to each other, causing a greater mystery as to their actual connection. So again, that coherent narrative focusing on the A story, it's between Kylo Ren and Rey. It starts off, and you get a little bit of it, especially with the mind-probing scene in The Force Awakens, and then Rian Johnson just takes it and runs with it and develops this amazing, rich movie with these Force connections and these two individuals that are feeling each other's pain, even though they're on opposite sides of this struggle. The First Order ends up striking at the heart of the Resistance and almost eliminates them at the end of the film, very much in the same way that The Empire Strikes Back started in their attack on Hoth. Kylo Ren ends up descending further into the dark after Rey rejects him and after killing Snoke. Rey, at the same time, ends up doing what? She ends up moving closer to the light. Snoke essentially plays the same role as Palpatine in the original trilogy. We just were introduced to him a film earlier than we were. Right, his whole storyline is moved over, a film to the left, in being in 7 and 8, and then not so much apart from just being in that little, in that little tank of the Snoke clones at the beginning of the Rise of Skywalker. And so then you get into the Rise of Skywalker. Rey is now essentially a full Jedi for the most part, right? Kylo Ren makes one last attempt to embrace fully the darkness, even going so far as to reforge his helmet and putting it back on, but he's faking it, right? He wants to be bad, but he's faking it. He knows deep down he needs to go to the light, but the dyad is too strong. Okay. In the meantime, they must face off against the mastermind behind this whole thing, Palpatine. Instead of a Luke and Anakin Vader redemption defeating Palpatine, you get a Rey and Kylo Ben redemption and the dyad joining together to defeat Palpatine. Right? And I see so much criticism of Rey being a Skywalker, by the way. I wanted to make this point in the middle of my notes. I see so much criticism of Rey being a Skywalker. But that, in my opinion, is the rejection of the intention. And this goes back to simply ignoring what happens in the movie. You don't have to like The Rise of Skywalker, but this is what happened. Rey died, right? A Skywalker in Ben Solo being a Skywalker himself, brings her back to life, right? When Grandpa Palpatine was inside of her, being her blood, her lineage, in my view, he died when she died. And it was a Skywalker that resurrected her. It was a Skywalker that used what remained of his own Force bond to bring Rey back to life. And in that moment, she's no longer a Palpatine. She's a Skywalker. Because without a Skywalker, she wouldn't exist. And what happens when you are parents and you give birth to a child? They are yours. They carry on your lineage. They have you. You gave birth to them. And I know that's a weird example to make, but if you sort of use that analogy in what Ben Solo did, he took what was left of his Skywalker essence and gave it to Rey and resurrected her. Why wouldn't she be a Skywalker? The part of her that was Palpatine died when she destroyed Palpatine. That's why I'm totally fine with it. And I really get so eye-rolly every time I go onto Instagram or Twitter and I see somebody, making a meme about Rey calling herself a Skywalker and the actual Skywalkers doing that thing with my fingers mocking her for it. It just drives me nuts. So, Brian, I hope that answers your question. I suppose that the easy one would have been, in what ways does the sequel trilogy is a coherent narrative across all three movies? Watch them. Of course they do. The movies would have been rejected en masse by everybody and wouldn't have made the billions of dollars that they made if they didn't have a coherent narrative across the films. Were they different? Sure, they were different. Rian Johnson did something really unique in starting his film, essentially 10 minutes after, or less than that, actually, that The Force Awakens ended. I dig it. It's different. It's new. It's unique. The Last Jedi is different. It's new and unique. And then you get to The Rise of Skywalker, and you have just this pure Star Wars adventure, of which, when I watch it, every single scene in it is, in my opinion, not to be missed. There are no bathroom breaks for me. I have to pause it when I watch The Rise of Skywalker. All right, moving on. J.O.B. asks this. John, do you think Ben Solo could have beat Palpatine on his own? All right. My headcanon says no. We probably won't ever get an answer to that. But my headcanon says that Ben Solo can't. Certainly not in the state that he was at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. Having just turned back from the dark side to the light, and the emotional toll of what he'd been through, and certainly with going and killing his father, I don't see him being able to defeat Palpatine on his own. And I guess the example would be that essentially Rey couldn't beat Palpatine on his own. Rey needed those Jedi that came before her to channel themselves into her to defeat Palpatine, who was representing all the Sith at the time. And it's great. And, I am, bam, all the Jedi. Boom, you're dead. That's just fantastic. I dig it. So, no, I don't think that Ben Solo could have done it. I think that if Rey and Ben were working together and Palpatine hadn't instantly discovered that they were a dyad and that he could draw the Force energy from them, that maybe. But I think Ben Solo had been through too much. I think the dyad combined could have done it. And there's an argument to be made that the dyad did do it. But no, I don't. All right, let's move on. Friend of the show, Page Turners, they were not host. Brennan Marr says this. I like your idea of a planner as opposed to a plan. This is going back to, and there's another email that we have here in a moment, the topic on last week's show of the article that I read about how The Rise of Skywalker, didn't need to be planned. It needed a vision, of which I disagreed. All right, moving on. Brennan also asked this. Of all the Star Wars soundtracks, which is your favorite? For me, it's the score from The Empire Strikes Back. Not only does it contain my favorite pieces of music, but I think it's the most operatic and therefore fitting to the space opera nature of Star Wars. I would probably put The Empire Strikes Back also on the top of my list, but I'm not going to lie, The Rise of Skywalker is a very, very close second. For those that remember, the soundtrack to The Rise of Skywalker to be included in the Oscar nominations was released early. It leaked out. The actual clips did. I still have that because it's unique that it was all the original music that was made just for The Rise of Skywalker. So if you get the actual soundtrack, you get the whole soundtrack, which includes the tracks that were written before that were included in the various motifs and tracks from all the Star Wars movies that came before it. Again, the one that was given to the Academy for the Academy Awards for Oscar season was just the brand new material. And I listen to that all the time. And without even having the themes of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy in them, it is spectacular. The main track that goes with Rey and the Resistance, to me, is as good as the Han and Leia theme that runs throughout The Empire Strikes Back and dominates that last sequence when Boba Fett is loading a frozen in carbonite Han Solo onto Slave One on Cloud City, and they're running to rescue him before Boba Fett takes off. I just love that soundtrack. And my headcanon says that John Williams poured his heart and soul into the final soundtrack that he would do for a Star Wars movie. And it shows. I take it back. You know what? I'm going to make Empire Strikes Back second. The Rise of Skywalker is my favorite Star Wars soundtrack. There, I said it. By the way, have I mentioned? I don't think I have. I love the fact they used the main theme at the end when Lando Calrissian shows up with those hundreds of thousands of ships on Exegol, and they bust out with da 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 da. I just think that's awesome. It gives me goosebumps every single time. All right, moving on. And thank you, Brennan. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing well, sir. Miranda writes this. What makes Star Wars great? Such a question should be asked all around the entire fandom at this time, probably more than ever. Honestly, as things are still quiet in the sequel trilogy aftermath, because it seems like all we are hearing are just strong reactive statements in the corners of the interwebs, in the comment sections, but there's not enough balance, nuanced and discussions that's more than just what we get from the news aspect that people often obsess over and spend too much time on. Not that we can't talk about news, but a lot of it has nothing to do with just talking about it as a story. It's just what's heard in the grapevine. Now, what makes Star Wars great, at least for me? I think the way it is without the way it without failure ignites enthusiasm, and that it's a mystery. It's a mystery in which it makes people want to be curious, and I want to know or have an idea of what could be and offer. This is a completely different than what I normally give, because I feel like I'm back in school with class and the teacher is having a discussion about something. No, but Miranda, I get what you're saying. Star Wars is just so rich, and like I started the show off, right? It's awesome. It's so much fun. In terms of science fiction, it doesn't get any better than Star Wars. And it does. It makes you clamor and want to know more and want to see more and see every frame. And that was certainly the case watching Solo. I had so much fun watching that movie last night. All right. Mr. Maz writes this. Thank you, Miranda, by the way. I guarantee you, if Lucas made the sequels, fans would have hated it as much, if not more, than the sequel trilogy. Lucas would have become the most hated man in geekdom for the second time in his life. I tend to agree. Thank you, Mr. Maz, for the comment. Owen Dowd writes this, with the comment of singular vision or collaboration in storytelling. He says, I think it just depends. One could argue that all fiction is better when constructed by a creative group. For example, I have a background in animation, and I've always loved working in a group. You could argue the other way for sure. I think the High Republic is more trying to be a new fun setting rather than a singular vision. And let me pull back on this final listener feedback and sort of maybe reframe what I meant. I get the creative group setting. All Star Wars films are done to certain in certain aspects, as a collective, especially when it comes to the creative element of it. What I'm more talking about is the singular vision of one person that's writing the story and making the decisions about the things that are being created by the collective. I think that Star Wars works better when you have a person at the helm who is ultimately, playing the captain of the team, who is making the final decisions on that. What concerns me, as I mentioned last week, when it comes to the High Republic, is there's not a singular vision when it comes to the overall story. It's a group of people figuring out the overall story. It's a group of people playing the role of a captain, as opposed to just one captain playing the role of a captain. And we did get some more High Republic stuff this week, and again, it's not hitting me yet. It's just not hitting me. So, I'll reserve judgment until I read some of the High Republic stuff, but so far it just has not ignited my imagination or interest the way that I thought it would. Hopefully that changes. And that's it for the show this week. Almost got it in under 40 minutes. How about that? You like listening to audio because you're listening to my voice. You like listening to my voice because you listen to this podcast. And you haven't gone and picked up the exciting space opera trilogy, EMBARK, an audiobook yet, where not only can you hear my voice via audio, but you can also hear it being read in this amazing tale. Go to mynerdworld.net, pick up your copy of EMBARK Book 1, Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, and Book 3, The Vanishing War. They are all available in ebook, paperback, and as I just mentioned, audiobook if you haven't got them already. If you pick up an ebook, you get a huge discount on the audiobook. So get both. Support the show. And again, as always, I need reviews. So if you have not left a review and you enjoyed the story, give me a 3, give me a 4, give me a 5-star. Go to Amazon.com. Just do me a favor, and if you have purchased the books and have not left a review, please go and do so. I need all the reviews I can get. And like I said earlier, sign up for the newsletter. If you're asking yourself, man, this is the first time I listened to the show. This guy's kind of interesting. I would like to support my nerd world. John, how do I do that? You do that by doing what I just said. Go pick up a copy of my book. Right? You can support the show, and you get amazing science fiction entertainment out of it as well. How great is that? All right, that does wrap the show up this week. Thank you so much for hanging out. I'll be back again next week. Looking forward to hearing from you and your emails, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Be safe wherever you are. 2020 is almost over, and I cannot wait for it to be done. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.